But I have never been scared of debt, because when you use debt in a good way, I think that's, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And I always say that bad debt are on items that depreciate, those that go down in value. So, if you take out a car loan, for example, that's bad debt because the car loan goes down, the car goes down in value. So it's not so good taking a loan out in the car. So these days when I buy a car, I pay cash for the car, for example. When you're buying property and you're taking a loan out of it, the property is actually going to appreciate in value.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 162. Clark, how's it going? How was your Thanksgiving?
Good. What about you? Everything good?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Did you enjoy some turkey?
Yeah. We were just talking before. We came across this article on Kiplinger. It says, good news. Thanksgiving dinner is the cheapest it was in 10 years. So Thanksgiving a few days ago here, but pretty interesting. It says the average Thanksgiving price, and this runs, I would think, a little low, it sounds, but it says about $47 for 10 people, which includes a couple pies, turkeys, rolls, vegetables. Anyway, scrolling down here, it just says turkeys are available for $1.21 a pound, 7%, down 7%. Down from last year. Whipped cream potatoes are 31 and 34 cents cheaper. So cheaper Thanksgiving, huh? Maybe we should do it more often.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, I guess, with the way the year has been. I guess that's one little bright side that, with as much economic uncertainty and all sorts of things going on in the world, a little bright side that we had a little bit cheaper Thanksgiving. I know a lot of people probably didn't travel like they were planning to and whatnot, but, at least they got a break on the turkey this year. Definitely didn't feel that, but I always get brisket. That's part of my Thanksgiving here in Texas.
You do a turkey at all?
We do turkey, but brisket's kind of my thing. So this year, brisket and turkey. And this year, in fact, we just decided that we weren't having a family or anything, so it was just going to be us, and we just basically decided that, you know what, we're not going to spend all this time in the kitchen. I really am not a big fan of spending a lot of the holiday in the kitchen trying to get food prepared and whatnot, and rather just kind of spend it together and buy the food. So I went and bought me a brisket from Franklin Barbecue here in Austin, Texas, and then I also got a turkey from them this year, which was phenomenal. And then we basically chomp on it, for almost a week after. It's great.
So how would last week on the show we had you? Kind of weird going back and listening to it?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird, but it's good. I'm glad we did it. And, that we'll see. I mean, obviously, the story will continue to evolve over the years, and I'm sure I'll learn more from others and the millionaires we continue to have and have had on the show, and maybe adjust some of my own mindset and things and continue to grow. And so, we do it now. It'll be interesting to look back in 5 or 10 years and maybe do another one, or maybe do another one every couple of years. I don't know. We'll see. But was it weird for you going through and editing the two of us together?
Yeah, it's just different, right? I mean, I think people liked it. It was fun to hear. It's fun to listen to, kind of a different perspective. So, but yeah, I mean, you listen to yourself each week you listen to it, you're like, oh, it's kind of weird listening to your own voice, hearing yourself speak. So in that sense it is, but I don't know. I mean, you were doing more of the talking because you were the one being interviewed.
Yeah, totally. I was glad my wife piped in there for a little bit. She had some good nuggets, and
yeah, that was fun.
Kept me on my toes for sure, which she always does anyway. So on today's show, we have Lloyd. He's a former teacher turned real estate investor, lives in Australia. He's got a net worth of over $10 million, and that's USD. We talk a little bit about his net worth in relation to the Australian dollar. And just for our listeners, 1 Australian dollar is about 73 cents in the United States. That's basically as of mid-November. So, $1 of ours is worth $1.37 in Australia. So just trying to paint that picture for y'all a little bit better. Sometimes when we bring some of these millionaires on, that are from foreign countries, we usually are talking in their currency. And in this case, we're talking in Australian currency, but nonetheless, he has a $10 million net worth USD, which is 13 million plus in Australia, and potentially well over that. So great interview with him. We talk about his journey and becoming a real estate, how he had a mindset shift from being a teacher and deciding to invest in real estate. Appreciate y'all turning into the podcast week after week. If you enjoy the show, we'd appreciate you leaving a 5-star review on either iTunes or Stitcher. Helps us grow the show and continue to reach new millionaire interviewees. Also, if you're interested in real estate deals, we've got several opportunities coming up here in multifamily and commercial as well. Reach out to us. We'll get on a call and get you some more information on that. So without any further delay, let's jump into the episode with Lloyd. Lloyd, do you want to just give us a little bit about your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, hi guys. So my background originally, I was a teacher, and over the years I got into property, and now I do property full time. I've got a large property portfolio. I work in a business as a buyer's agent and a property developer as well.
Wow, I want to get into your story a little bit here, but what's your net worth sitting at today?
Sitting at around about 12 to 13 million.
Wow, that's awesome. Congrats.
Is that AUS? Is that AUS or USD? Sorry.
That'll be AUS.
Okay.
And how did you mentioned you started as a teacher. How did you make that transition to being into real estate and property?
Yeah, so the way that started is I realized, quite early on, probably not as early as I should have, but I realized that I wasn't going to make a lot of money as a teacher and have enough money for retirement. So I didn't want to live on the pension or in any of the government benefits because they wouldn't be enough. I realized I needed to actually do better for myself. So I started to get into investing that way just to set up some more financial security for the future. So it kind of went from there. And I grew a real passion for property, and I was having quite a bit of success through it. And then over the years, my strategies changed as well from the types of properties I was buying and to I guess, initially buying properties and sort of holding and waiting for that growth to what I then started doing was, developing properties and manufacturing that equity and flipping properties and making faster returns.
And how old were you when you started that?
So I would have been in about my mid-20s at the time, so around about 20 years ago.
Wow. And all of your net worth is in real estate now?
It is in real estate, absolutely, yep. So I'm both in the business I operate and in my property portfolio.
And is it mainly single-family homes, condos, multifamily? What's kind of the breakup?
Most of what we do are in duplexes, so that kind of thing. So and there's a few sort of apartments and single family homes in there as well. Part of my net worth is obviously my primary residence as well.
That's pretty phenomenal. So how many duplexes roughly do you have then?
I've currently got probably 6 to 8 duplexes in my portfolio at the moment. Two units in each duplex, which and they're all cash flow positive, so they pay a nice return as well. That's mixed up with a few single dwelling houses and also some townhouses and villas, which are essentially halfway between a house and an apartment, I guess.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. And are all of these pretty close to where you're located or where your primary residence is?
No, not exactly. I believe in diversifying. So I've actually got them all down the east coast, the eastern seaboard of Australia. So I'm located in Sydney, so I do have properties in Sydney, but I also invest up in Brisbane, down in Melbourne, and also in some country areas in between, sort of up the north coast, down the south coast. As well. Some of the areas outside of Sydney pay better rental yields, but the areas inside Sydney, you get that better long-term capital growth. So I balance the portfolio with different types of strategies in different areas.
So Lloyd, what do you do for managing the units? Do you manage them all and just drive around, or do you hire somebody else to take care of all that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question because I don't manage them myself. I'm a big believer that you need to actually appoint someone to do that. So I have property managers and I pay them a percentage of the rental income that comes in. But the property managers are located in the areas where my properties are. The benefits of having a property manager is they collect the rent and then pay that to me, but they also pay the bills on my behalf and they organise repairs. So if I'm in Sydney and then I've got a property in Melbourne, which is 1,000 kilometres away, then I can't really get there to attend to repairs. So it's important to have someone on site who can actually be there to attend to that kind of stuff and look after the tenants that are in the property.
Right. What do they charge for, just curious, in Australia for property management fees? In the US here, it's, 8 to 12% or something usually, but what is it there?
Yeah, so it varies. So in Sydney, you're looking at around about between 4.5% to 5.5%. In Brisbane, it's around about 8 to 10%, and in Melbourne, it's kind of around about 6 to 8%. So it varies a little bit. But if you're paying up to about anywhere, if you're paying about 9% anywhere, then that's too high generally in Australia.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's back it up here, Lloyd. You started as a school teacher, right? What was your salary when you started working as a school teacher?
Yeah, so I was earning less than 50,000 a year at the time, AUS. So that's not a lot of money essentially, and barely enough to start investing. But that's what I was on at the time, and yeah, I really needed to do something to try to move forward from there.
Yeah, so 50,000 just for our listeners, AUS is about 35,000 USD. So that means your net worth is about 10 to 20 million USD. So you're making 35 US, 50 AUS. How do you even start investing on that? Were you just saving a lot and living frugally, and just little by little you were starting to save?
Absolutely, yes. I was living very frugally. So I had a few things in place. So, for example, I'd never bought a new car until after I bought my first property. I'd never even been overseas, so I saved money. I didn't spend money on overseas holidays. Saved my money. Didn't go out. Even back in the days when I was at university, I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't even afford to eat, my meals and stuff. Often was just eating sort of toast or ice cream cones for lunch. So I had not much money back then. But when I started teaching, I was just saving my money, and I got together a deposit, which is essentially 10% of what I needed for my first property. So I essentially saved up about $25,000 out of my salary, and that went towards a deposit of my first property. I managed to find a good mortgage broker who helped me get a loan for that first property, which wasn't easy on a low income, but that's what got me going. And then it was a matter of picking the right properties that were going to get growth over the years, because when the properties grow in value, I can leverage off them. And that's why property is such a good asset, because I leveraged off the growth and was able to then borrow more funds to buy more properties and start growing my portfolio from there.
So you said you saved up about $25,000, 10% down payment. Usually in the US, unless it's an FHA loan, you need about 20%. So a little bit lower there, unless you lived in it, or did you rent it out, this first purchase?
So the first purchase I actually lived in at the start, absolutely. Over here, we generally, we used to be able to even get loans from only a 5% down payment. These days, it's still possible to get loans for a 10% down payment. More often than not, you do need about 20% these days, simply because the banks have tightened things up because of some of the issues in the current climate. But generally, you can get just a 10% down payment, and that gets you into a property.
Yeah, gotcha. So, okay, 25,000, let's call it $250,000 property, right? 10%. How long did it take you to save up that 25,000?
Yeah, so that probably took me about 3 or 4 years of good saving there, but living very frugally, paying not much rent. I was living in a property, rental property where I wasn't paying much rent and things like that, living very frugally and things like that. So, saved a bit as hard as I could over that time.
Gotcha. And so why real estate? Did you know somebody that did real estate? You call it property down there, but what, your parents, your family, a friend? Why did you decide real estate was the way to go, I guess, is the first question. And then the second question, how did you find this first deal? Was it something that you found through online? Did you find it through a broker or a friend? How did you find the deal?
Yeah, so in terms of why real estate, for me, and I never had any real estate in our family. My parents always just owned the family home and didn't have any other assets like that. But for me, I always found real estate to be quite a solid, less volatile asset. So it doesn't swing, I guess, as much in value as say the stock market does. So if you got a good value, a good property, good real estate in good area, it's not going to go down massively in value overnight like the stock market can, depending on what the economy is doing. So for me, I felt it was less volatile and good for the long term. It takes longer to buy, longer to sell. So there's a lot of things there, and I figured that people always need somewhere to live. So real estate to me is always going to be a good investment. As long as you're buying in an area where people do want to live. So the first property I found, that was something that I found online, and it was a new property that had just been built. But it was in a target sort of the suburb that I kind of wanted to live. It was reasonably close to the water, but it was also close to some amenities like a train station, some shops and things like that. So I knew that would also make a good investment property later on when I decided to move out and actually get some rental tenants in there.
Nice. Good for you. And so that was a duplex, right?
No, that was just an apartment. So the first one was just
Okay. How many total units are you at now? If you count the duplexes as 2 each, right? How many total apartments or units or homes?
So yeah, we're looking at about 20 altogether.
20 altogether. Wow. Wow, good for you. So in terms of numbers, you said you use leverage, right? How levered are they?
So these days they're actually not that leveraged, but at the time when I was growing my portfolio, I would use a leverage of 80 to 90%, which means I could get another loan for 90% and just put a 10% down payment. But often that 10% down payment would actually come from the previous property that had grown in value. So I could just use that as collateral. That would be a 10% deposit to buy the next property. And that's how I'd grow that. Over the years, though, especially when I got into developing, because with my duplexes, for example, I didn't just buy a duplex. That's when I started developing duplexes. So you're actually manufacturing equity and profits there. And when you get large chunks of profits there, you pay down your debt a lot quicker. So now, my portfolio value has a leverage of only about 40%. So it's essentially 60% equity in there and only about 40% in loans.
So how come you keep it that way? Are you just living off the cash flow now and that's the way you like it and just more safety?
Yeah, so I like that obviously does provide more safety, living off the cash flow with that because they are cash flow positive. And then still, because I've got more cash flow with it, that allows me then to buy more properties and not have them so highly leveraged. So the last property I bought, for example, I only had a 50% loan. So I still took out a loan for it, but it was only a small loan. And that one was actually a property I bought earlier this year, which is another unit, which I actually bought for my 14-month-old son. I like to joke and call him the youngest property investor.
Well, congratulations. So these 20-something units, how much do they cash flow? I assume they all cash flow. You said all your duplexes did, right? Your 6 to 8 duplexes. What about everything else? Are they all cash flow and how much monthly?
Yeah, so they all cash flow, and yearly per annum, they're bringing in about $250,000 per annum in terms of cash flow there.
Wow, that's fantastic. So that's what you're living off of now, obviously.
That's part of what I'm living off because I also have my business as well. So the business itself obviously has a large amount of cash flow that's coming in as well.
Okay, so $250,000 divided by the 22 units is about $11,000 a month in cash flow. What does one typically rent for, Lloyd?
So it depends on the area and everything, of course. So generally, they can rent for anywhere between $600 a week to $2,000 a week, depending on the location of them. Because some of the ones that are in Sydney and they're close to the water, then they're very highly sought after, and they rent for high cash flow. Some of the ones that are maybe a little bit further out, in a country area, they cost a bit less, but they also rent for less. And they may rent for $400 or $500 and things like that.
Wow! So you have a couple in Sydney that rent for $8,000 a month.
Yeah, so it's quite a balance there. Yeah, absolutely.
Are those vacation rentals or more long term?
No, they're long term. I like to look at long term with everything I do.
Gotcha, understood. So one question, Lloyd, when you only put down 10% there, just curious, you still have enough to cash flow? You still collect enough rent to cover that service?
Yeah, that's right, because they won't always cash flow positive. So I've got a cash flow positive portfolio now that has a lot of net rent return now. But when I first, when I was growing the portfolio, there was more debt attached to it. So a lot of the rent that was coming in would be going off to pay off the loans. So therefore, I wasn't that much disposable income that I could live off at the time. So while I was growing the portfolio, I was actually still, working as a teacher at the time and things like that. So I had my teaching income and then I was growing the portfolio as my future goal, because I knew my future goal would be to live off property and to have a property business and stuff like that. So the cash flow positive position they're in now isn't the way they were originally. So I've grown it like that over the past number of years.
Yeah, fair enough. And looking back now, right, having all these rentals and having the $250,000 of passive cash flow from the rentals every year, are you glad you used debt? Do you wish you would have used less? Or on the flip side, do you wish you would have been even more aggressive with debt?
I'm quite comfortable. I don't wish I would have used more necessarily, but I have never been scared of debt because when you use debt in a good way, I think that's, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And I always say that bad debt are on items that depreciate, those that go down in value. So, if you take out a car loan, for example, that's bad debt because the car loan goes down, the car goes down in value. So it's not so good taking a loan out in the car. So these days when I buy a car, I pay cash for the car, for example. When you're buying property and you're taking a loan out of it, the property is actually going to appreciate in value. So taking that debt is actually a really good thing, and that's how you get ahead, because you really do need to use debt to be able to get ahead. And I think most wealthy people in the world have been able to get ahead by actually using debt to their advantage.
Yeah, certainly. And certainly the real estate and the small business investors that we've had on our show, I think we've interviewed about 150, 160 millionaires now. Most of them, if they're in real estate, right, have used debt. I think there's maybe been a couple that have not. But certainly anybody that we've interviewed, Jace, correct me if I'm wrong, in real estate has used debt to keep it going.
You kind of need to, because real estate is so costly, obviously depending on the location, that most people don't really have cash to buy a large amount of real estate in one go. So they need to actually use debt to get to buy the property in the first place. And that's why you sort of need debt. Maybe when you're buying shares and things, you can start with a lower amount of money and just put a bit of cash into it. But when you're buying real estate, that may cost you several hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. You kind of need that debt to actually get on the property ladder.
Right. So how long did it take you, Lloyd, to build up this portfolio? And did it start off slow at first? Was it discouraging, or how quickly were you able to build this up?
So all in all, it probably took me about 16, 17 years. However, the first few years were a bit slow. I wouldn't say it was discouraging, but I didn't have a real strategy or a plan in place. So I was buying properties, and they were I was buying them and just holding them for growth. And then, if the properties won't go up in value because I bought them at the wrong time of the cycle, or the market just wasn't moving because it was a bit flat, I felt like I had some debt, but not a lot of cash flow or growth coming into the property. So I changed my strategy a few years later when I started to actually develop the duplexes, and that allowed me to move a lot quicker, because when you buy a property and just hold it for growth, you're relying on whether it's going to increase in 7 or 10% in value in the year or something like that. And that's a slow strategy. When I started developing duplexes, you essentially, you build the property, you have it subdivided into two properties, and then you can make $200,000 or $300,000 profit just like that from the development process. And that's what really started to get me going. So the back end, the back few years that I've been doing this, I've been able to move things a lot quicker than when I first started out.
Okay, I want to dive into that, but because that's obviously interesting and I think unique. But first, I'm just curious, and I think, if I'm remembering correctly, of the real estate investors we've had on the show, I think you probably have one of the most diversified asset classes in the sense of in real estate, in the sense of having prime Sydney rentals, right, that rent for $8,000 a month versus something that's out in the countryside, right? So how do you decide where to buy? And do you ever get nervous if you're buying outside of a popular area that maybe the area will worsen and your property won't go up in value? Or do you just look for good deals regardless of where they are?
So that's a really good question. So when I'm buying outside of a capital city, so outside of Sydney or outside of Melbourne, there's a few things that are really important that are on my checklist. So I need to buy in an area that has several industries of growth. And several drivers. And what I mean by that is that it means that the economy needs to be driven by, let's say, there needs to be manufacturing, there needs to be education, a university, a hospital. There should be lots of amenities, lots of transport links, all of those. And you can have those in good regional centres. So I'm not buying in, really outback towns in the middle of nowhere. These are still major cities. They're just not the capitals. So they might be a couple of hours away from a capital, but they're still good centres. Often those areas, the properties are a bit cheaper, and in comparison, the rental yields are a little bit higher. Because when you're buying in Sydney, the price points are very high, and there's generally a limit of how many you can actually buy in Sydney, before you sort of get maxed out. So you need to balance it up by buying some cheaper ones elsewhere. And things like that. So that's how I diversify and work that out. It's also important to buy in different areas. If you have all your eggs in one basket and the market doesn't do very well, then all your properties don't do very well because they're all in the same spot. I believe in actually buying them in different locations so that if one location doesn't do so well, then other locations should. And we might be seeing that at the moment. We've got a bit of a problem in Melbourne at the moment. the coronavirus, and the economy may not do so well there at the moment. But Sydney and Brisbane are actually doing quite well, so it's good to diversify, for reasons like that.
So Lloyd, you've built up this great portfolio. Where do you go from here? Do you have a target net worth you're trying to hit, or number of units, or amount of passive cash flow?
No, not really. I'm pretty comfortable with where part of the goal was to buy our dream home, which I did a couple of years ago. So that was that was kind of part of the equation there. So it's all about I guess leaving a legacy and setting up our family so that we don't need to sort of worry about finances. It means that I can spend I've got good available time that freedom, because financial freedom for me means also time, like lifestyle freedom, that I can spend time with my family when I want and things like that. And, we can go out on the boat whenever we want and that kind of stuff. And then also, when my kids go to school, I can just, sort of pay their school fees and not worry about where the money's coming from. So that's kind of what I've set the portfolio up for. In terms of what I'm looking, moving ahead is in terms of what I'm doing in my business, and my goal is to actually help people in less fortunate situations than myself, and that's something that we can dive into a little bit later on if you like as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. You mentioned that you want to be able to have more time with your family, and a lot of our millionaires that come on talk about that and talk about the value of their time as it relates to their finances. What are some of the things that you like to spend your time doing when you're not focused on work or focused on managing your rentals or your portfolio at all?
Yeah, I mean, for me, these are quite really little basic things, but I love just going out for breakfast, going out for coffee with my wife and my son, taking the dog for a walk, going out on the boat. Those kind of things are just really nice to do, just catching up with friends. Those things are just, I love being able to do, but not having to restrict them to the weekends, but being able to do those kind of things during the days, during the weekdays as well, because, I'm not tied down to a 9-to-5 teaching job like I once was. That's all, that's good. So I've got the time to be able to do things like that.
Yeah. And you mentioned going out on the boat. Do you have a yacht, or what do you like going out on the boat with?
I do go sailing, as well,
there you go.
but
okay.
But I don't have I'm part of a sailing club. I don't own a sailing yacht. Some of my friends do, so I go out there, but I own a power boat. So my boat's a power boat, which is a sort of a 29-footer boat. It takes about 10 to 12 people. So enough to take a few friends on. And we like to go out and, have a bit of a good time, have a few drinks and go sunbaking and all that. So that's all nice.
That's awesome. Did you buy that after you became a millionaire or before?
Yeah, and I only bought that one last year.
Oh, wow. So you're definitely well into the millions before you bought that toy.
Yeah, that was, I think that was one of my rewards. Actually. Because when we bought our dream home, that's a waterfront property. And then I thought, okay, now we need to have a boat to park out the front as well. So, so all those start to come together.
There you go. So you mentioned that you want to help some underprivileged people that didn't have the opportunities that maybe you have had. What does that consist of, and what's your mission with that going forward?
So my mission with that is actually helping people in disadvantaged countries such as Africa and Nepal, helping them maybe with some education, maybe even building some houses, some schools and stuff over there. So I'd like to do that sort of thing on a bigger picture. At the moment, I donate a lot of money to sort of charities in Australia. So we had some really bad bushfires over here during our summer, and I donated a fair bit of our business income over January and February to the bushfire fundraising appeal. I also donate to the Cancer Council, which is close to my heart because my dad passed away from cancer. So I donate to those sort of things. Wanted to sort of, help on a bigger scale. And I think having a business that generates good income and then having a property portfolio that allows me the time to be able to do things like that means that I can actually go and help people that are in less fortunate situations than myself.
Yeah, very commendable. Do your friends and family, Lloyd, know of your wealth, or is it pretty private?
I think they do. Well, I don't really discuss the numbers as such, with people, because it's not really so, you don't stand around a barbecue and start talking the specific numbers.
Right. Once they listen to this show, they'll know.
But, but people are pretty aware that we're doing okay.
Yeah. So going back to your duplexes, Lloyd, you mentioned earlier, I know you kind of have a unique strategy there. So what exactly do you do? You buy it and then you subdivide it into two separate and sell them off?
Yeah, so we buy a block of land And now that land may or may not have a house on it. Now, if it has a house on it, we may knock the house down, and then we'll build a duplex on that block. But essentially, the duplex is built as one title. And what we do over here is we do what's called a strata title, which is essentially just dividing the property by name into two properties. So you might buy something that's, say, number 1 Equity Street. But then when you subdivide it, they've got their separate addresses. So you've got 1A and 1B, for example, and then they're valued each. You can sell them separately, and that's where you create the profits. And the thing about that is you just need to make sure you're building them for less than what you can sell them for. So, for example, if you can get a block of land and build a duplex for $600,000, but you know that each unit on the market will sell for $500,000, like each of them, then that's $1 million there, but it's only cost you $600,000 to build. Then you've got a $400,000 profit in there, sort of using round numbers. So that's how they work, and that's the sort of strategy I've used to move my portfolio ahead, much quicker.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it's cheaper to just build it all as one building, I guess, right? One building versus building 2 different single-family homes. You just build one building, all the plumbing lines, everything goes the same. You just build it as two sides, basically, and then sell them off as separate properties.
Yeah, that's correct. It is cheaper to build that way, and because you're building one property and then selling it as 2, you can make a profit. Whereas if you build just one single dwelling house and then sell it, you're not really going to sell it for much profit because, you may sell it for a little bit depending on how much you build it for. But really the duplex is where you're building one property but selling 2. So you're forcing some profit into that deal. And when you repeat that process over and over and you're flipping the properties, and sometimes you keep them obviously for cash flow and things like that, then that has a great benefit on your portfolio.
Sure. What about zoning? You ever run into zoning issues, or I guess you probably just obviously buy where you're able to do that?
No zoning issues because I won't buy anywhere that I don't do the full due diligence on. So I'm very familiar on all the zoning with all the council areas that we're buying in. And when we look at a block of land, there's a lot of things on the land that we need to check out, make sure that there's no easements that are going to affect the building, check the slope of the land for stormwater and sewer. There's a lot of things we need to check off there, and we do all that before we buy the land so we don't run into any problems.
Lloyd, how long did you stay as a teacher, and did you get a different job after that, or did you just quit your job, and when did you decide to quit? How much passive income did you have when you quit your full-time job?
When I quit I was a teacher. I was probably a teacher for about 15 years, so I was a teacher for quite a while, and I had quite a large portfolio that I was building up during that time. But when I quit my teaching job, I probably had just over $100,000 in passive income from property, and my teaching income at the time, because over the years it grew a bit, my teaching income was about $100,000. So I essentially did what a lot of people try to do, which is I simply just replace my income through property. So my income was $100K, and then when I had $100K coming from property, that was enough for me to be able to retire from teaching and just move into doing what I love full time, which is property.
Yeah. So how did you know when, Lloyd? Because on one hand, one could say, hey, I have this $100,000 in passive income coming from a property. If I just stay working for another couple of years, I'm making $100,000 there. Should I just stay working for another year or two and build it up, and then I can have 150 in passive cash flow? Like when did you know, hey, I'm stopping at 100, even though I could maybe build this faster if I kept doing both? Was it just too much on the property side that you couldn't do both, or how did you know exactly when to leave?
The main thing is that I knew exactly when to leave. It was when I had enough of teaching, and I felt that it was time for a change. And when you lose your passion for something, you should stop doing it. So for me, I knew it was time that I didn't want to be in that job anymore. But I wasn't. My mission was never to just leave and retire. I always believe that you should be contributing to society and doing things. So I was never my mission to just leave and sit on passive income and sit on the beach and whatever. For me, it was about then starting my property business so I can then help other people replicate what I've done. So, and that's essentially what I did. I stopped teaching, and then I started my property business, which I essentially had already started just before I was still teaching actually, and I had started my property business. So I was doing quite a lot of stuff all at the same time there for a while. But that became my mission, was really helping people in trying to do what I do.
Yeah. So what does that mean now? Are you investing with others or syndicating deals, or what property business? Are you a broker? What do you mean?
Yeah, so I'm a buyer's agent. So essentially a property broker, I guess is another way of putting it, which is essentially I help people find property deals and then manage that whole process for them, looking at what their goals are. So when I meet with people, I sort of, the first question is I ask them where they want to be in, say, 10 years' time, what their goals are. And then I find property deals that match up to what they're trying to achieve and set a roadmap on how they can get there. So if their goal is to, say, achieve 100K passive income from real estate, then I'll set a strategy and a roadmap for them to be able to achieve that so they can understand how using property can actually help them get there. And then myself and my team then manage the whole process from sourcing the properties, doing all the research, the property acquisition, and just managing everything there and building up people's portfolio so they can then enjoy that passive income and start to achieve their own goals.
Okay, so it's a little bit of coaching though on the side as well, it sounds like.
It is, absolutely. It's very much some coaching. And that's why I think that I've combined my two passions. So I've got education because I've obviously been a teacher. I was always passionate about education and I'm very passionate on property. So I've combined the two. So education and property in one. And I'm basically just educating people on property and helping them through property.
Yeah. What did you teach, Lloyd, and what age group did you teach when you were a teacher?
So I was a music teacher and I taught kids from basically year 3 through to the end of high school, so primary, middle and high school.
Okay, so music teacher turned real estate investor here, right?
That's the one.
So just to close out here, Lloyd, with some questions that we normally ask at the end. Did you have any debt at all besides on your real estate? Any school debt or car debt?
No, I don't. So in the past, I've had a couple of car loans which were paid off at the time, but these days, as I said earlier, I just buy a car, for cash and things like that because it's a depreciating asset. So I don't have any other debt other than what I have in real estate, which I feel is good debt, obviously for reasons mentioned before.
Yeah. What's the most expensive car you've ever purchased?
I've got a Mercedes E250 convertible at the moment. That's probably, and I've got a BMW as well, but I think the Mercedes is a slightly more expensive car.
Okay. What about meal out? Are you a foodie?
Oh, sorry. What was that?
What about eating out? Meal out, most expensive meal out that you've paid for? Yeah,
we go out quite a lot. So yeah, we often go out and we might spend $500 on a meal on some of the 3 Hat restaurants, which is the equivalent to a Michelin star restaurant. So we love going and eating out. Absolutely.
Okay. How old were you? Do you remember how old you were when you became a millionaire?
So it would have been before I was 40, so probably about maybe 38.
Okay. Late 30s. Nice. Have you ever used a financial advisor?
I haven't actually. I generally, I've pretty much advised myself on my finances, I guess. But yeah, I'm always a little bit skeptical on financial advisors. I know there's some good ones around, but you do need to be careful about, the ones that you get.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned everything's in real estate, right? Do you have any investments in any stock market?
I don't. No, it's in real estate.
Okay. Any books or websites or anything that you recommend?
Well, there's probably a couple, but I'd probably like to mention a book that I've recently written, which is called Positively Geared. And that's just become an Amazon bestseller. And that is basically detailing the journey of my life, where I started to where I am now, and essentially a bit of a roadmap on how you can actually build a multi-million-dollar property portfolio. So that's a book that's I think would be a good read. Yeah, another book that I found some inspiration from was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So tell us your book. What's it called and where can people find it?
Positively Geared, and it's available on Amazon.
And it just goes through your story.
So it goes through my story. We talk a lot about real estate and those strategies. So obviously I talk a lot about the duplexes and how you can make money on it. But I guess at the end of the day, it's not just another property book. It's more about sort of my story and how I came from, where I was to where I am now, and talk about how I made money through real estate, the different types of strategies, and also, some of the mistakes I made along the way and what not to do, because over the years you learn not what not to do as well as what to do well and things like that.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. So again, that's Positively Geared by Lloyd Edge. So just a couple last questions here, Lloyd. I know we're running short on time. As a real estate investor, how do you decide how much cash to keep, either now or, previously, right? How did you know how much to build up before you bought the next deal, and how much cash maybe as a percent? Is there a metric you used, cash as a percentage of your net worth, or a dollar amount? How much cash do you hold, and how much did you hold?
Well, for me, I've never really used a metric there, but I've always been very conscious to have a lot of cash. So I always like to have a lot of cash in the bank because I think that cash is king. If anything happens, then at least you've got some cash there. So I've always got a lot of cash, and the more properties you have, I think that you should have a buffer for each property. So, for me, that's, I like to have sort of, $50,000 per property just put away, just in case, something happens where you don't have tenants for a while, or you need repairs and stuff. So it's good to have that buffer there. And also, paying down debt. For me, my primary residence, which is a $5 million house, which I'm currently paying off. I like to have a lot of cash to put into that and just pay that loan down as quickly as possible, because it's a non-tax deductible debt.
Sure. So just last question here, Lloyd. What advice do you give to somebody who's maybe looking to start in real estate, right? Because you've invested primarily in, or really all in real estate, or what mistakes, coupled with that, I guess, what mistakes did you make? Is there something that you wish you would have done differently?
I think the main thing is that people should just make sure they get educated and seek a mentor. Make sure they get advice from someone who has done what they're trying to achieve. So for me, I sort of got into real estate. I sort of had a dream, but I bought the first property without advice, and then bought the next one without advice, and then maybe had a bit of mentoring later on. But you really need to. Education is really, really important. So you really need to understand exactly what you're doing, and investing in yourself is very important before you go and actually invest in the real estate itself.
Yeah. So just in closing here, Lloyd, if people want to get in contact with you, where can they find you? You mentioned the book, but I know you have a website as well, right?
Yeah, I've got a website, which is Oz Property Professionals, auspropertyprofessionals.com.au. And very happy to, people leave an inquiry there. I've also got an email. People can contact me email as well, which is lloyd@auspropertyprofessionals.com.au. And happy to have a chat with anybody.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Lloyd from Sydney, net worth 10 to 20 million USD. Thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It's nighttime for us here, but early morning for you, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's not too early. It's pretty good, actually.
Well, thanks again, Lloyd.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.